I'm actually going to leave them to do it to start with, and I'm going to come back later, so turn back around 7.
Thanks, Chris. So my name is Georgina Brooke. I'm a content strategist at One Further.
I'm Mike Keating. I'm the head of digital services at Art Fund.
I'm Sarah Briggs. I'm the Collections Development Officer at the Museums Association.
And we're here today to talk to you about funding digital. And we're really talking about the outcomes of a 6-month research project that's just wrapped up. So Art Fund and Museum Association appointed us and our project partners on this project, Cultural Associates Oxford, to do a bit of research off the back of 2 years' worth of funding, mainly digital and mainly emergency projects. And the aim of this project, which Mike and Sarah will talk more about shortly, was essentially to look at the lessons learned and the successes over the last 2 years, and think about how we can pay forward those successes and make something of those lessons, so that ultimately we're in a position where we can fund more successful digital projects in the sector going forward. Over to who's next session. Over to Mike. Sorry.
Thanks. Normally I walk around when I'm presenting. It feels very strange to be sat down in some kind of evil UN kind of chair. Yeah, I'm Mike. I'm from the Art Fund, which is, for those of you who don't know, the national fundraising charity for art. We started in 1903, which is a very long time ago, and it might feel like sometimes not much has changed since then. And Art Fund is kind of almost one of those things. It started off as a group of people who wanted to kind of pool their money to save works of art for public display. And we've kind of stuck with a very similar model that we deliver in a much different way now, largely through the National Art Pass, which many of you will have heard of. And kind of sales from the National Art Pass, we kind of gather up that money and we give that out to the sector in the form of grants. For those of you who don't know, we also have a ticketing platform called Art Tickets and a crowdfunding platform called Art Happens. And that's kind of how we support the sector. Yeah, and I have other stuff to talk about as well, don't I? How has 2020 changed things? Obviously, in the first national lockdown, we stopped selling passes, people stopped going to museums closed. Museums and galleries needed a lot of support just to keep the lights on, and we kind of expanded our funding program through something called Respond and Reimagine, which enabled us to respond to the sector's needs and help them reimagine how they're going to engage with their audiences while they're closed. We ran 3 rounds. We ran one round of Respond and Reimagine, and then 2 further rounds of what we called Reimagine, which was much more focused around that kind of digital engagement and audience engagement. And yeah, at the end of that 3rd round, we got to a point where we need to understand how well some of this work that we funded has gone, whether these projects have been successful, whether they've not been so successful, and what's kind of been learned. But also, which museums are tackling similar challenges? Is there a potential for us to join some of these people up, share that kind of success, and like Georgina said, kind of play that stuff forward so the rest of the sector can learn from it. So we wanted an opportunity to get our heads up instead of down in funding applications, understand what worked, try to help the sector out, and also try and make us a bit of a better funder by asking the right questions of digital projects when they were coming in and learning, what can be of most use to the sector as a whole. Over to you.
So I, as I say, work for the Museums Association. We are a membership organisation for museums and people who work in them and with them. But a big part of what we campaign for is socially impactful museums. So that's a really big driver for us. A huge part of my role is to manage the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund, which provides funding for museums to do socially engaged and socially impactful work with their collections. We were in the middle of a funding round in spring 2020 when the first lockdown hit. In fact, we were very excited that we'd reimagined our grant fund and we were going to offer longer term funding, which immediately we saw was completely inappropriate. It was not going to work. So what we did is we immediately pivoted. We changed the collections fund to offer smaller grants of around £20,000 compared to the £100,000 sort of figure we normally offer. Because we wanted to support even more museums to be able to support collections and engagement when they couldn't physically open their doors. Because of this, we saw more digital projects than ever before, as you might imagine. We saw quite a few that addressed issues of digital poverty as well, so it wasn't just digital that we funded in that period. But we immediately saw that museums weren't necessarily very well equipped to deliver swiftly digital engagement. I imagine that's a lot of experiences in this room, but I think we're in a better place now. A year later, we ran the Digital Innovation and Engagement Fund, and that was supported by UKRI, following their Mindsets and Missions report that they did with liminal space. And that offered slightly bigger grants, up to £50,000, that was very much focused on digital. It was about digital engagement with underrepresented audiences. Now, we found that there were vast differences from the applications we received in the experience level and the ambition from the museums that applied. We felt there were some really important lessons that could be learned from the two funding streams with a little bit of focused research. And all the way through this period as well, we were talking with our fund a lot. Our funding was fairly similar. I know some of our sustaining engagement with collections grants that didn't get through ended up being funded by our fund and vice versa. So there were lots of conversations happening. So we knew there was this shared amount of data. We knew that we had a huge data set as well. So sustaining engagement within collections was 4 times oversubscribed to our normal funding round. And digital innovation engagement was far more popular than we thought it would be as well. We were absolutely swamped with applications. And we really wanted to learn something from the applications that we didn't fund as well as the ones that we did. So we knew that there was lots that could be done there in terms of looking at the sort of applications we received. Also, because we funded 26 sustaining engagement with collections projects and 12 digital innovation and engagement projects, we knew that there were working projects out there that we could use to provide information on the potential of digital, especially in terms of reaching audiences that museums sort of struggle to reach traditionally. We know that we learn more from projects where things don't always go to plan, which is, means lockdowns worked quite well. So live projects, we know, are a really good way to explore the sort of barriers and problems that people might encounter in doing digital work. So that's why, this project was we felt really relevant for us to be part of.
Great. So in terms of the inputs that myself and my team at One Further and Cultural Associates Oxford were working on in our analysis, we had the grantee data from the funds that Mike and Sarah had just mentioned. So we could see not only who had applied for these pots, but also the funders' evaluation of those projects. We also conducted a literature review, looking at research and surveys on similar research questions that we were looking at. We conducted a sector survey, and we did a number of external interviews, including with some people that I know are in the audience today, Josie Fraser, Casey Moffat, and Duff Jones, amongst others. The second part of the project involved action learning sets, and this was facilitated by Cultural Associates Oxford. What this meant was that we recruited participants from the funded projects made up of these grants that Mike and Sarah have talked about. Those action learning sets formed 5 groups of 5, so 25 in total, that met over the course of 6 weeks. Each week would have a different theme, so one week it might be strategy, one week it might be diversifying audiences, and the week would begin with a provocation, so a speaker who we thought was expert in the field would give an opening talk, and over the course of the week, the various project groups would meet up and discuss the topics that had come out of that talk. And the action learning sets generated about 50 hours worth of data, and it was a really rich source for us, giving us much more dynamic information about what was happening in different kinds of cultural organisations than more static sources of information like a kind of survey result. So in terms of the structure of the talk, I'm going to talk about these 3 different research questions that we looked at and speak for about sort of 4 minutes on each. And after each, I'll get either Mark or Sarah to talk about their responses on the back of the findings that we came up with. So first of all, I'm going to look at how we can use digital projects to generate and measure social impact and go about diversifying audiences. I'll then talk about the potential of digital projects to monetize. And finally, I'll look at scaling up digital projects. So our main insight from how to go about creating socially valuable digital projects that diversify audiences is that to do that, you require collaboration between what are, or at least have been traditionally, quite siloed different departments. And to demonstrate the way that our researchers found that this works best in practice, I'm going to have recourse to a case study just because it really exemplifies the best way of working that we've found. So this is a screenshot from a rehearsal as part of Opera North's Couch to Chorus. So you may or may not be aware of this initiative already, but it's playing on the idea of NHS's Couch to 5K. And what's clever about it is if we think about a typical opera-going audience and we look at the typical cost of an opera ticket, it's quite a sort of moneyed, sort of upper middle class activity. What was clever about this project was that it wasn't targeting audiences that typically go to opera or audiences that are necessarily based in Leeds, where Opera North is. It was very deliberately targeting, and this was in lockdown, anyone that wanted to participate in the benefits of being part of a choral group, not necessarily based in Leeds. It was run by what's called the Digital Education Manager, which is quite interesting because one of the findings from our research is that education and digital don't typically sit in the same team. And what we found in lockdown was that there was quite a tendency for organisations to put material that had worked in the physical space online without adapting it much for the digital realm, which didn't by and large work particularly well. So in terms of creating socially valuable digital projects, it's that blend of understanding what audiences want, how to go about creating an audience-targeted project with that understanding of how to create a digital-first project and why you're using digital. So just to try and sort of visualise this, what we found is that socially valuable digital projects essentially exist in the intersection between having a strong rationale for the audience mission, so with the Opera North example. As a consumer, we understand that Opera North has an authority on choral music. It makes sense for them to do this. We don't actually need to know what their mission statement is for that bit of work to make sense. Incidentally, their mission statement is about expanding the art form and expanding it to a broad number of audiences. So it did make sense of the direction that they want to go in. In terms of audiences, it was deliberately diversifying who they traditionally talk to, but it also made sense digitally. So this wasn't a project that could have happened at the scale and would have made sense to be physically happening in Leeds. They were deliberately taking the benefits of digital and thinking, how can we target people that are interested in us topically and not necessarily in the same local space? So in terms of the kind of ultimate takeaways from this research question, it adhered to this sort of tripartite model. It had a good sense of why this particular project was happening, why Opera North was doing it. It had a good sense of who the project was designed to target, and that the people running it knew how to engage that audience and how to evaluate that in terms of longitudinal evaluation and qualitative evaluation. On the digital side, it was a strong product digitally. It was a series of Zoom rehearsals that culminated in a live stream performance. So they knew how to put on a digital product. It had that rationale for being digital that I've mentioned already. And it used some digital evaluation best practice like A/B testing, donation messages. And incidentally, although this was a pay what you can model, there was no compulsory fee for this. It did generate over £100,000, I believe, in voluntary donations.
Over to me. Yeah, so what we did with this this bit of learning, we've got a history with our funding. We always try to provide some sector learning there as well. And one of the things that we did a few years ago was produce a toolkit for measuring social impact, so that, to help museums be able to articulate the social benefit of their projects. It's got lots of resources to help the sector in there, ways for how to measure not just the reach of your work, but sort of how in depth you've impacted people's lives. We do know that this toolkit is not designed with digital engagement in mind. It sort of predates the pandemic era. But there are lots of tools out there to measure analytics. But there is a challenge in that because there's lots of stuff that tells you how to measure the reach of your digital engagement, but not so much the depth. So you can see how many people viewed your YouTube video. But say your YouTube video was on climate change, you then can't know how many of those people took those lessons away, maybe made some changes in their lives so that they could have less of a carbon footprint. That's harder to measure. So we know that we need to help support the sector to measure that level of engagement too. So thanks to this research, we've got a whole range of new content. We haven't put it online yet, but that's what I'm going to be doing in 2023, is I'm going to be adapting the toolkit so that it's a bit more up to date and that it works for both in-person and digital engagement. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. Secondly, in strategy has always been a really big part of the findings in this report, and I know we're going to talk about that in a bit. But we want to support museums to get this right. So our Museums Essential toolkit is Museums Essential Online Learning platform, rather, is a way that we think that we might be able to do this.
Next up, so we're on to the second of 3 research questions. I'm going to be talking about monetizing digital and the potential of digital projects to monetize. And I'm really talking about new content experiences or digital products that were created under lockdown. So I'm not really thinking about ticketing or shop systems that already existed before that. And there are really 2 main areas of this section of the talk. The first finding essentially was that the majority of museums in the cultural sector aren't making a huge amount of money online. But what I'm going to start with is a couple of examples that did manage to make quite significant income through new digital products. And then I'll look at the kind of low-hanging fruit, which is the kind of reality for the majority of the sector. So what we have here is a screenshot from London Transport Museum's Hidden London History Patreon account. If you're not already aware of Patreon, it's a platform that plays on the idea of patronage. So it was originally created more for individual artists and creators, and it allows you to sign up at different tiers of membership to receive bespoke or personalised content to a particular personality, or in this case, a museum. So you can see here that, for example, at the £10 a month level, you can get access to a Discord channel that allows you to input directly with the team. And when it's talking about the team there, it's talking about the Hidden London History's YouTube production team. So London Transport Museum have a very successful YouTube series. This Patreon account essentially allows them to sort of monetize on top of that. And at the £21 a month level, you're getting bespoke live stream content. So you can understand model. The London Transport Museum deliberately modelled themselves on the Tank Museum that had done a very similar thing. Tank Museum had a very successful YouTube and TikTok account, and they, before London Transport Museum, created a Patreon account to monetize it. Another example that's not as well known, but I think equally laudable, comes from Oxford University Museum of Natural History. So in December 2020, so when we were in sort of more or less full lockdown, they released a Mystery at the Museum escape room with the celebrity and presenter Steve Batchel. So what that meant was that on the night itself, kids and families could log in real time and help solve science puzzles to ultimately allow Steve to escape the museum. But what was clever about this was that in the build-up to the event, they had a custom mailing list from which they created from their existing main mailing list and social media channels for this specific event, but they were also able to augment that with Steve's quite significant followings on different channels. That ultimately culminated in the event itself. The event cost, I believe, £3,000 to put on and generated over £33,000 all in voluntary donations from that one-off event. So in terms of takeaways, we've deliberately brought those examples together to tell a bit of a story because they sort of naturally hang together. So some of the conclusions from those sort of 2 or 3 examples are that certainly in 2020 to 2021, we could see that live and interactive video did seem to be something that people were willing to pay for. And I didn't include this, but I could have done examples like V&A Academy, where we're looking more at sort of educational examples, but again, live and bespoke interactive video content. Characters is another thing. So if we take the Tank Museum, the characters that Patreon has monetized are the same characters that go into their TikTok, that go into their YouTube. It's the same with London Transport Museum and the personalities that go into their YouTube series. And to the extent to which Steve Batchel is a real life personality and character, you can see that trend extends that way. So the sort of fandom that's built up around characters that are associated with cultural brands does also seem to be something that it's possible to monetize in this way. But it does come with a bit of a health warning. So London Transport Museum was actually one of the participants in the Action Learning set, so they were able to talk to us quite informally about the process of setting a Patreon account up, and they were quite honest in saying, you're at the point at which you're setting a platform like this up, you're committing to deliver quite a lot of bespoke and original content that you can't put out anywhere. It has to be bespoke to there, and you don't know at that point that you're going to get return on investment and enough individuals signed up to make it worthwhile. So in terms of the reality of the most of the sector is that they're not making a huge amount of money from new digital products or services at all. What we found in the main was the good news and the bad news is that there is quite a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of monetization. So first off, we found that quite a lot of museums are still not doing things like segmenting email lists. So this means that it's very difficult to fundraise. But also, from a consumer's point of view, it suggests that if people aren't able to input about what their preferences are, it suggests that they're maybe not getting information that's particularly targeted or relevant to them. Similarly, it's quite unusual in the sector for museums to be running their own targeted advertising. Typically, if they are running it at all, it will be run by the wider university or council, but very often it's outsourced to a different agency if it's being done at all. And if we think about something like the Opera North case study, when you're creating a new digital product that's deliberately trying to go out to an audience you don't currently serve or talk to, it's really useful to be able to understand how these tools work in terms of getting your message and getting your product out in front of people that are interested in you topically and in the subjects that you cover, but don't necessarily already know about you. And finally, a really simple one, it costs quite a lot of time and money to get a prospect to the point at which they're ready to donate on a cultural organisation's website, but there's quite a pervasive issue with usability barriers on donation asks still, so that obviously can frustrate a lot of that goodwill you've kind of cultivated up to that point, if that's the case.
Cool. So yeah, as a funder and as an organisation that tries to provide products and services to the sector, one of the things we were really interested in from this report is like that focus on income. And one of the things that did come out of these action learning sets was that some organizations are like struggling to understand how they can maybe use QR codes or collect contactless donations on site as some kind of link between, people see contactless or something that happens on their phone, or a QR code which happens on a computer sometimes as a digital project, even though it's like something that happens in person, and to a user that's an entirely like in-person interaction. We're really interested in how we might support the sector with either kind of donations best practice or rolling out some kind of product that can standardize donate forms so that smaller museums can have a much better online experience to collect that money a bit more easily, as well as looking into how we might work with either deliver it ourselves or work with a partner to look at contactless donations that can be, embedded throughout certainly smaller or mid-sized venues. Because we also run a platform that's for ticketing called Our Tickets, we're kind of looking at could we weave it into that, or should we look at building something separate and standalone? It really depends. There will obviously be lots of user research that goes into this, and it depends on what people like you tell us that you need. With regards to online learning, we looked into a lot of this stuff kind of just pre-pandemic. Our fund's done a lot of work on the issues that Georgina was just talking about with segmentation of marketing lists, donation best practice, and we have quite a lot to share, and we have scoped kind of e-learning tools in the past, but as I'm sure everyone here knows, there's like a lot of skills content in the sector through stuff like Digital Culture Network, through Arts Marketing Association. So what we don't want to do is like replicate stuff that already exists, that either has an audience or maybe hasn't found it. So we're just kind of trying to work out what our role in that space may be.
Last up, how scaling up digital and how we go about creating a good post-COVID strategy. So one of the sort of main findings from this research, which I think Sarah's already touched on, is that a lot of the problems that we hear about in the sector already, and that I think Kati encapsulated really brilliantly in the keynote, things around burnout, vision, prioritization. Ultimately, we found or the research strongly indicates that this boils down to low confidence in strategy. So I'm just going to take you quickly through some of the sort of how we got there. So in our sector survey, we asked cultural organisations about their level of digital confidence in different aspects. And you can see this third and fourth column along, things like digital experiences and digital products, relatively low levels of confidence were reported. And this isn't particularly surprising because museums in the main weren't having to create digital experiences or digital products to the extent that they were in 2020 to 2021. But strategy was more of a sort of red flag because museums have been writing strategies for decades. Everyone theoretically has one. It was interesting that this chimed with some of Museum Association's own comments on the sustaining engagement with the Collections Fund. So at that point, they noted that overall we saw that lots of applications were limited in their scope in the sense that they didn't address key elements in their medium and long-term plans. And you can see how it might be difficult to present a medium or long-term plan if you're not sort of confident or your organisation doesn't have up-to-date post-COVID digital strategy. As part of our literature review, one of the things we read was the Digital Culture Network's independent evaluation. And they asked in March 2022, so March this year, how developed is your organisation's overall digital policy plan or strategy? And this went out to over 800 cultural practitioners. And in March this year, 17% of those nearly 900 respondents said that they didn't have one. So this was a bit of a red flag. Combined with this, we also had a whole week of action learning sets with participants from the funded organisations, and it was really apparent how little organisations had to speak to in terms of their own organisational strategy. And we heard people talking about outsourcing strategies, digital strategies, but then when they did outsource those strategies, what they got back was not satisfactory. It wasn't a sort of prioritisation. It was more an audit with a list of tasks. And, you know, all museums have enough lists of tasks to be getting on with. And then we also heard of quite a few instances, museums waiting on an overall overarching organisational strategy before they began their digital strategy. And if you think about the number of decisions that the digital teams had to make over the past 2 years, not having an overarching strategy to hang that on is obviously going to debilitate the amount of wider organisational buy-in that you can get.
Oh, I can go first on this one because your answer's better than mine.
Go on then.
So yeah, with mentorship, like I said at the start, we know a lot of museums are facing quite similar challenges. A lot of museums are on kind of the same journey, but are at different stages in it. And we think there's a lot that can be shared. Say, Museum A, that's at the very start of a digital journey, could learn meaningfully from Museum B, which is like a couple of years further ahead. It's not something we're great at, connecting these kind of peer groups up. But we're interested in exploring how we might kind of improve that kind of network. You know, like if you're looking at building a website, these people that built a website, it was really good. This is the kind of stuff that they did. Or like how we might bring kind of cohorts of museums together and fund them as a group to solve a challenge that they will face. But the MA have a much more sophisticated kind of mentorship and learning model than we do.
Yeah, so we already network all our grantees. So we've done this from before COVID as well. It was just the Ethnic Urban Collections Fund network, but now that's got the digital innovation and engagement grantees in there as well. And people are in that network for a good few years after their project finishes too. And I run events every year. They've been online, but I'm looking forward to going back to in-person a bit next year, which will be very exciting. And we do lots of sharing, learning, and lots of trying not to reinvent the wheel. So if one project's done something really, really well, we'll try and get them to share that with as many other projects as possible. And I'll always try and make those connections between projects that are working with a particular audience or a particular collections type or a particular medium. So that's something that we do that we can definitely talk with the Art Fund about how we do that. And I mentioned the Museums Association's Museums Essentials programme earlier, and that's definitely something that I think we can help. We can help with generally digital sort of stuff, but I can definitely feel that a section on creating a digital strategy would be a relevant section of that. I kind of got the idea of a framework in my head. We've not put that into practice yet. It takes quite a lot of resources and time to produce a museum's essential module, but it's definitely something that we're having those conversations about now. And now we also know that we have lots of partner organisations with lots of existing knowledge that hopefully we can bring in. I think it's worth mentioning very briefly, if you might indulge me, to talk about the changes we've made to the collections fund for 2023 too. So I think it's quite interesting what you were saying about having a strategy to pin things onto. The collections fund evolves all the time. As I said, we were just about to do a whole new fund in 2020 and we had to rethink that. But in 2023, it is going to be different. It's going to be a bit different and it is much closer aligned to your organisational goals. So that's something that we're hoping that you can sort of pin your funding around. We're looking particularly at EDI sort of elements. So that will help us, help museums, help you to reach those underrepresented audiences that the last 2 years have made even more visible.
I guess we've kind of touched on some of this already. Part of one of the reasons that we wanted to get involved in this project was to help ourselves become better funders. So we've learned a lot from looking at like three different funding rounds worth of funding, and like what's worked and what hasn't. So as a funder, we now know applications come in with like certain criteria not met. We have a like much better sense now that, well, maybe this organisation isn't quite ready for this project yet, or maybe this project won't succeed. So we need to work on how we can get them to a place where it will. I think Art Fund's always been a pretty flexible funder, and certainly Respond and Reimagine in its earliest phase was a very permissive like fund. I'm not going to say, well, people from Art Fund are watching this, so I probably shouldn't say that you could probably get funding for most things. And now there's like a bit like the criteria is a bit more rigid, and like part of working on this project, I had never really worked on the funding side before. I've got much more of a digital background, but it's meant that like I'm involved in assessing funding applications for stuff that happens on computers now, and maybe I bring a different kind of set of criteria to someone else who maybe has very little digital experience would. So it kind of makes us a bit more robust in that sense, I think.
What can I say now after following that? I think that we are trying to be even more flexible at the Museum Association. So one of the things that we're going to be doing next year is our funding can now support core costs, which is something that was out of scope previously. But we want to give a little bit more trust to our organisations to be able to achieve those outcomes that will help them push their organisational goals forward. Which is why it's tied to that. So that's what we're going to be doing.
That's reminded me that like one of the things that you can apply to Art Fund for is like support with digital strategy. If it enables you to like better engage your audience, and obviously digital strategy is supposed to help you do that. So that's like one of the things that we would encourage people to apply for funding from the Reimagine program. I did want to mention cost of living as well, because in the literature review there was a suggestion. This was conducted, I think the particular piece of research this was quoting from was from 2020, when some people who had maybe kept their jobs and hadn't been furloughed and weren't going out had much more money to spend than they might normally have. And there was an indication in there that people would be much more likely to pay for digital content than they ever had been previously. You know, like people paying for, you know, online escape rooms or like doing quizzes because there was almost nothing else to do. But recently, the Lloyd's Consumer Digital Report, which landed, I think, a couple of weeks ago, about a third of the people surveyed in that said cost of living crisis is going to meaningfully affect their ability to access the internet on a day-to-day basis. And that research is from May. So that's like people cutting down data packages, people moving to cheaper packages for home broadband, people maybe cutting those things out entirely. And the Audience Agency's Autumn Cultural Participation Report said something like 92% of people are planning on cutting back entertainment spend. So you put those two figures together, and I think it's fair to say people are very unlikely to pay for stuff now that they might have decided they might pay for 2 years ago. So when it comes to stuff like monetization and looking at like Patreons and like developing all of this content, maybe go into that mindful that the audience demand might not be there when it used to be.
That's it.
Thanks everyone, that was great. What's also interesting is having this bit of work kicked off back in February, March. This is the first time we've been in the same room to be able to talk about it.
Yeah,
I was happening live. Right, we're wrapping up in about 6 minutes. So, there were a few things that I thought was quite interesting to pull together. Georgina, you were saying about the impact that a lack of strategy can have on the kinds of making activity a bit more rudderless. And Catherine Willard was saying earlier about how if an organisation is doing something that's a bit flashy when the fundamentals aren't there, then there's a distance there, which is particularly good. Mike, Sarah, from your point of view, when you get an application in for someone who's asking for something, to what extent do you look at, do they have a coherent strategy? Have they got the basics covered? Can you tell?
It's something that we're going to be deliberately looking at from next year. So we will be asking for those, for what the strategy is, what your project is connected to. And it's something I often talk to people about when they're talking about funding, because, if I ask people, what should we do? People say, give us money for the longer term and some short-term funding, especially around collections work. It's a big thing in the sector. So I've always said to people, whatever you do with your short-term funding, you need to make it work for your organisation. And that means that needs to help you achieve your organisational goals. That's what easier if you've got organisational goals, of course. So I think it's really critical. I think it's the foundation that you can build everything on, really.
I'd agree with that. I think when I'm reading a funding application, you can really see the work. You can see the applications from organisations where the work they are applying for funding for makes sense as part of the journey that organisation is on, or how it's woven into business objectives. I know a lot of museums don't like to think of themselves as businesses or organisational objectives or strategic objectives, and then sometimes you'll get an application that's we want to build a website. Why? Our current one isn't good, but you can see that there's the core of an idea there, but the link to kind of outcomes for the organization or outcomes for the audience isn't there. And if you have that kind of organizational strategy, that really helps. If you have an organizational strategy and a digital strategy, that really helps, and that tends to come through in that kind of audience insight and businessy stuff. But a lot of organizations aren't in that place, but still need funding. So it's a tough balance to walk.
Carty this morning was talking about the problem with attracting, retaining talent in the sector as well. And I imagine, from a funder's point of view, you're looking to fund projects that will be successful, which will reach their objectives, which an organisation is capable of delivering. Digital specialisms have just proliferated. You don't just get a website designer these days. You get a back end, a front end person, a graphic designer, a product manager. The list goes on. A lot of cultural organisations don't have that kind of capacity. How do you see this affecting the kind of digital projects that cultural organisations are able to produce?
Yeah.
Because I know this is your point.
So that's a tough question to answer in front of a room for digital and technical.
Well, these kind of the exceptions.
But speaking from my own background, what I've seen in the sector, and I was more charity before I joined Art Fund, witnessing what happens there to your kind of, you might start out as a one-person digital operation, and then you might be quite good at that. So the organization is hey, can you do this as a digital thing? And if you're lucky, a couple of years down the line, there might be 2 of you, or there might be 4 of you. And you end up having to learn all of these different skills and cover so many different bases. And something that was in the cultural content report was something like, there's like 10 different priorities that digital content teams, but still digital teams in the sector are trying to achieve with most of what they're trying to do, which feels crazy as like, that's not like a realistic thing to be able to achieve. And that's why you see so many people leave the sector. I think part of that is, like, there is an argument that some private sector organizations are like, they've got bigger budgets, they've got like maybe some more organizational strategy, more strategic goals that some organizations in the sector have the time or money to actually like deliver. Where am I going with this?
Can I give you another prompt?
No. I think like you sort of see like lead UX researcher and stuff in the private sector in a way that like that will be 1% of someone's job in this room. And like what I'm not going to do is solve that problem, but it kind of does come down to money, the budget for that, an organization taking that work seriously, including it in its strategy and having the money to do that. And I think realistically, it's not always something that's solvable within this sector, which sounds really downbeat.
We've had a question come in, kind of anonymously from one of the versions. We'll get microphones out, because I bet you've got more interesting questions than I have. But asking, do you think efforts are being made to reduce the number of fixed-term digital jobs in the sector? This is part of the retention issue. Is there a big conspiracy going
on? I know that when we did the first couple of rounds of Reimagine, what we were funding in essence were like content roles for people to slightly like come into organizations, do content for an audience that was no longer able to show up. And a lot of those had kind of like mixed success. Like some organizations did really well out of that, got like very good engagement and were able to build kind of lasting relationships with those new audiences, and some did less well. And part of that kind of was related to legacy planning. If people were applying for funding to us, they were doing it for like a 12-month FTC or a 6-month FTC to kind of get them through this form, and then I'm sure everything will be fine, so we don't need to think about this anymore. And what we've found in subsequent funding rounds is people starting to apply for funding for that role again, or like a slightly more sophisticated version of that role. So that kind of means museums have seen a benefit of doing that, but haven't been able to make the case internally for making those roles permanent. So there's definitely something, a lot of people think digital is very cheap, and the skills and expertise it requires to run a good digital operation are not. And it feels like there's a challenge within the sector of kind of making that case internally to boards of trustees or senior management teams about the real cost of those roles. And like, if you want all the benefit of that cool digital stuff, if you want to do even just like good collections online, let alone cool Patreon, cool kind of escape rooms, you've got to pay for it. And it does feel like there's a tension there where like some organizations really see the value of that and others really don't.
I think that comment that we had is interesting in the light of what you were saying, Sarah, about funding, allowing more core funding, longer term funding things. The short termism quite often contributes to expertise being brought in temporarily and then fluttering off at the end of the contract. Sarah, I just want to ask you, and then I'll open it up to other people, on the subject of the social impact of these kinds of projects. One of the things that we found in the reports that we'll talk about when that's coming out is when is the kinds of digital projects that people were funding. Some of them were almost like participatory projects that had a digital thing or the creation of some sort of digital output as the core around which people were grouping. And it's almost like that digital thing is instead could have been anything that they were creating together. Whereas other projects where the connection to the audience was a lot more intangible. I'm wondering if, in terms of measuring that kind of social impact, it can be difficult if you're working with dispersed kind of audience. Do you think if The intention is to achieve more social impact through digital projects. That's going to affect the kinds of things that are funded and not through that kind of programme.
Possibly. I will just add a little brief thing about the benefit of measuring social impact in terms of, just to build on what you were saying. I think it's an amazing way if you can crack that, if you can be able to measure the social impact, the benefit to audiences of their health and well-being of your work, be that in person or digital. That can really help you build a case for that work with audiences. So that might be a way to help build a case to increase that capacity. So it's really important. There's lots of benefits for measuring that for you as an organisation as well, in terms of enabling you to speak the language of the people that have got the money. But yeah, for us, a lot of the projects that we fund, because social impact sort of underpins a lot of what we do. So there is often an element of engagement with participants rather than it's more about the engagement with the audiences than necessarily about the output for wider audiences. But the two don't need to be exclusive. So what we're increasingly seeing, we're increasingly funding, is more projects around participatory practice. So that will be engaging with a group to co-produce an output that might be digital, and that there's a lot of great digital outputs that we funded. So, for example, with Brent Council, they produced a QR code tour around Brent, sort of the heritage of Brent, with digital content behind that tour. And they worked with a group of young people from Brent to produce that. If they hadn't have done that, they said to me that they don't think their tour would have been anywhere near as interesting or anywhere near as good, because those young people were able to tell them sites that they could use that they hadn't occurred to them, or content that they could include that hadn't occurred to them to use. So I think we're used to, in the heritage sector, being specialists of our own content, and maybe we need to open that out and pass that out to our groups that work with us, to tell them, to tell us what content we should produce for audiences. So I think even if your output is a mass thing, it's really important to get other people involved in deciding what that content is going to be. Those are the projects that produce the best outputs for me. The most interesting, unexpected outputs are the ones that are co-produced by members of the community.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone out there who might have a question?
It is 5 p.m. on Friday.
I've got loads. I can keep going for hours, so don't feel happy. There are some more. We've got one back there.
Hi there, it's Susie again from the Government Art Collection. Previously I worked for Museums and Galleries Edinburgh up in Edinburgh, and one of the problems that they had when they applied for funding was having staff who were present, who could apply for funding, and then when funding was awarded, to see that funding through to, if it's acquisition of staff or if it's acquisition of consultants, and then see the project through from that stage right to the end without leaving or being made redundant or getting burnout or getting to the point where they hated the project so much that they didn't want to be there anymore. And I was wondering, especially if you're talking about people taking repeat funding to continue these projects, how is the funding stream supporting people who are applying in their mental well-being of having to continuously do this? Because it is exhausting applying for funding continuously. Is there anything that in your examples would say that they're trying to do to support those users in these applications?
That's a really interesting point, and I wish I could say we've got an amazing wellbeing programme to support you throughout your funding process. We haven't, but that's the reality. I am aware that it's a difficult job, and it's been a really difficult job for the last few years, as if it wasn't hard enough before. I do support people all the way through the funding process, so from the very first little inkling of an idea right the way through the whole of their journey, it's always me. So there is that continuity, which helps. So I do get to know people, which means that, I hope that they feel that they can be a bit honest with me and say, hey, this is awful, if they need to. We do also encourage real honesty. So if the project's really not going well, people can tell us it's really not going well, and we're really flexible, so we won't, chastise them for that. And I do also sort of think about the proportionality of the amount of support I provide as well. So if you're a smaller organisation and you're doing 10 of the jobs as well as applying for funding, you're going to get more of my time than if you're from a large organisation and that's all your job is to apply for grants from trusts and foundations. So I do always take all of those things into account to try and make it a bit more equitable. all the way through. And we are doing more with our funding for next year in terms of supporting those projects, and there's going to be action learning sets of the grants that are funded, because we really want projects to think about what they do when the project finishes, so how they can hand that over, how they can make the project, the elements that then become core, which is partly why it's tied to your organisational outcomes, to make sure it's not just in and left all at the end of it. So yeah, that's what I can say. I wish it was a better answer, but
yeah, I think from our side, we'll tend to have the same kind of case manager. Once an application is successful, it will be that person who is with the applicant for the entirety of that journey. But yeah, like much the same. I don't think we've done a lot of work around how to make that process more manageable when you're in it. One of the things we are looking at is how we can make the funding application process a bit less stressful and a bit more accessible. We have like a really long and complicated form application process that takes forever to complete, and we're very aware that not everyone wants to or is able to sit there and fill it out in the detail that we quite strictly specify. So we're looking in to lots of different ways we can encourage applications to come in different formats, be that whether we end up creating like much shorter forms that collect information in a slightly different way, through to like video applications that are much less like, can you please tell us about the amount of money you made in 2001 on this thing? We probably don't need that level of detail that we ask for to make a reasonable assessment of whether or not something needs funding.
We've got time for one last question before we unlock the doors and let you out.
no one else. We're stuck here all weekend.
Cool. Right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much. So just before you, the rapturous applause, there is a public version of the report that will be released in the coming weeks. There is likely to be some sort of session online which presents that and goes into it in further detail as well. So follow the Art Fund and Museums Association online through all the usual channels, and I'm sure we can. Please, a round of applause for that wonderful panel.